Prison guards. When did you catch a prisoner trying to escape? A woman's husband helped her attempt to escape. He managed to smuggle in a lockpicking set and a jammer of some sort that messed with our keycard doors. I'm guessing he snuck it in parts and told her how to put it together. She waited until after lights out and quietly picked the lock to her cell. She put pillows under her blanket and cut her own hair so it looked like she was asleep in bed. She had studied the guard schedule for weeks leading up to her escape. She knew where they were going to be and where she could hide. She made it to the door of the cell block without any trouble. She fired up her jammer and the door popped right open. She went through and shut it behind her. She made it most of the way before an alarm went off and the facility went on lockdown. Another inmate had seen her escaping and snitched when the guards were passing her cell. She was caught shortly after and escorted back to her cell. Her husband was arrested for smuggling her contraband and aiding in a crime. Update: I don't know how he got the stuff in or how the jammer worked. I do know that he worked in the tech field and knew about how the system worked. He did try to escape after he was put into jail as well. He didn't make it very far either. I had just started at the prison I worked at when this escape attempt happened. We had one inmate that was known to be manipulative. He would constantly stir up trouble for his own amusement. He knew that he could get away with most of it because we could never actually pin anything on him. He was arrested for killing his brother. I never heard why he killed his brother. He just killed him and then called the cops on himself and pleaded guilty in court. So now he's sitting in jail for the rest of his life. He had already been there 10 years by the time I arrived. I guess he finally had enough of being in jail and decided to escape. He had managed to stir up the gangs in the prison. Everyone was on edge and waiting to fight. All it took was making someone accidentally bump into someone else and the entire room was in chaos. He slipped out of the room and hid. He waited until backup cleared the hall before he moved to the next phase of his plan. He moved into a storage closet and accessed the ventilation system. He had been shoving food into the vent in his room for weeks. He gathered the food in a pillowcase he had managed to shove in there and hid in the walls and ceiling of the jail. He knew that the jail would be put on lockdown after the riot. He also knew that it would be extended once he couldn't be found. He was going to wait it out and then escape after all the commotion settled. He had food and would listen to the radio through the vents. He had been gone for a week when he got caught. He was up in the vents listening to the radio. He sneezed and everyone in the room froze. An inmate looked up into the vent and saw eyes. He let out a yelp and the guard came running over. He was pulled out of the vent and moved to a maximum security facility after that. It was scary how smart this man was. I work at a women's facility and we have had some strange escape attempts. I'll list a few of my favorites. 1. Inmate charged with drug trafficking shoved food inside her genitals and let it rot. She got really sick. She got a fever that wouldn't come down. She nearly died on the way to the hospital. Her plan was to escape at the hospital, but never expected to get that sick. She was very lucky the EMTs were able to keep her alive. 2. More than one of the inmates in for prostitution have tried to leverage sex to get out. It almost never works. One of the times it did, they were caught before they left the grounds. Someone spotted the girl changing in his car and called it in. He was a dumb man. 3. We had a low-level prisoner try to escape. She was arrested on charges of possessing a stolen car. She was walking back from a medical appointment in the facility, unaccompanied when she attempted to scale a wall. She made it most of the way up. Then she lost her footing or something and fell. She hit her head when she hit the ground and blacked out for a few minutes. Thankfully she wasn't seriously injured, but she was moved to a facility with higher security. 4. One inmate started fasting and dropped a lot of weight. She bundled a sheet under her shirt to make it seem like she was still at a healthy weight. She managed to slip through the bars and get most of the way through the jail, but then passed out when she tried to run across the yard. She was taken to the ER immediately where she tried to escape again. 5. My absolute favorite was the woman who jumped a guard and tied him up in a closet. She took his uniform and used his key card to get through security. She probably would have gotten away with it had she not stopped at the women's bathroom before she left. One of the female guards was in there and freaked out when a man walked in. She was promptly put back in her cell and the guard was given his uniform back. At the jail I work at, we had a staff member try and break an inmate out. One of our nurses got involved with an inmate. They met after the inmate got into a fight and needed some stitches. They had been sneaking around and having sex for a few weeks. They eventually came up with a plan to break him out. He was going to complain of stomach pains and get sent to her. She was going to say that his appendix was in danger of rupturing and send him to the hospital. From there she would help him leave the hospital. They were loading him up into the ambulance when the scheme fell apart. The EMT wasn't allowing her to ride along with him. Then fighting happened and it became apparent that it had been a ruse to get him out of jail. He went back to his cell. She went to jail for conspiracy. We had a drug trafficker try to escape 1 year. He was a ringleader of sorts and was going to be locked up for quite a while. His teenage daughters would often come visit him. They would mostly just sit and talk for a while. One day after the girls had their meeting, the younger girl was acting really nervous. Me and my partner stopped them as they were leaving to find out what was going on. We realized within moments that things were not as they appeared. The inmate had disguised himself as his daughter and left her in his cell disguised as him. He was wearing his daughter's clothes, a wig, and a silicone mask. It was convincing from a distance. He might have actually made it out had he not been acting so nervously. He was quickly escorted back to his cell. I work in a larger jail. It has 3 floors and takes up a large amount of space. I've worked there for about 15 years now. In my 15 years, there has only been a handful of escape attempts that stick with me. I'll tell you my top 3. The first was the guy that ate several cloth objects. He ate wash rags or something and had to be taken to the hospital to get them removed. While waiting for surgery, he managed to get out of his cuffs and pass the guard. He made it to the lobby before collapsing in pain. He was brought back to his room and had his surgery. The next was a convicted murderer. He faked a serious mental break, trying to get into a mental health facility. I guess he believed that they would have less security. He really went for gold in his performance. He pissed himself constantly. He acted erratically and talked to himself. He's starting to refuse food, which is what caused us to call in a psych. He either fooled the doctor or the doctor saw through it and wanted to teach him a lesson. He got the transfer. He was back within a year. He was a model inmate after that. I don't know what happened, but something changed him. My favorite, though, would have to be the guy that jumped out of the 3rd-story window. I'm not sure how he managed to get out the window. The details were passed through so many people that I'm not sure what the real story was. He managed to get out the window and to the ground. Unfortunately, no one ever told him to roll out of landings. He broke both ankles and tried to crawl away. He was caught within 10 minutes and rushed to the hospital. He wasn't even going to be there that long. He was caught with a small amount of drugs and got a fairly light sentence. He was in a wheelchair for most of his stay. I was the one caught trying to escape. I was still in the booking process, and it was a busy night. I managed to slip out of my cuffs. I sat there for a while with my hands visibly out of the cuffs. I slowly moved closer and closer to the door, testing to see how far I could go. I finally got up and started walking toward the door. I made it to the door when my arresting officer walked in and saw me. He took me back. They put me into a holding cell after that. I didn't expect to actually escape, but I very nearly did. I was released the next day. Update: I was arrested for my drunken actions. I tried to, loudly, fight a statue in the park. I'm not proud of that one. I've got a story for you guys. I tend to go out on work detail with the inmates. I like being in the fresh air and most of the time the inmates are well behaved. This was not the case one day. We had a young man try to take off. We were out cleaning up the side of the road, doing the normal stuff, picking up trash, cutting back brush, cutting the grass. The guy was on trash detail and he seemed like he was going to behave just like everyone else. Suddenly, he drops his bag and takes off running. I take off after him because I was closest. The rest of my team gathered everyone else back on the bus quickly. The guy makes it to a busy intersection where he is promptly hit by a car. I dragged his body out of the road and called for an ambulance. I rode with him to the hospital and stood guard until a replacement arrived. I got back to the jail to put in a report. I was told by a co-worker that another inmate told him that the guy had said something about running on the bus ride there. I found out the next day that the guy had been planning this for weeks. He was in jail for possession of controlled substances. I think he was a heavy user and it affected his brain. He came back with a broken leg and a couple fractured ribs. Technically, the guy did escape, so I hope this is good enough. We were tipped off that inmates were escaping the prison and crossing onto a rancher's land that backs up to the federal complex. The inmates would then pick up contraband that was dropped off for them and bring it back to the prison. We soon set up surveillance and spotted a truck pulling onto the private property and dropping off a large bag. Shortly after, an inmate serving time for narcotics charges was seen running from prison grounds, grabbing the bag and making his way back when we caught him. Inside the duffel bag, we found 3 bottles of brandy, 1 bottle of whiskey, multiple bags of bugler tobacco, pre-packaged snacks and a large amount of home-cooked food, including BBQ sausage and fried chicken. I had to keep a straight face as they were going off on this guy, but in my head, I was dying laughing. The guy just wanted some booze and home-cooked food. It was one of the funniest that has happened at my job. I work in a juvenile facility and very rarely have escape attempts that actually go anywhere. We had a 17-year-old boy come in after a particularly violent crime spree. He committed several armed robberies and also has several assaults under his belt. He was just an angry, violent kid. He picked fights while in the facility. The scary thing was that he was smart, incredibly so. He knew how to get what he wanted. He also had a knack for taking things apart. He caused a riot or two by stirring the other inmates up. One day, he just decides he has had enough of being on jail and attempts to escape. He managed to tear out molding around the window of his room and rip out the window. He was tackled at the fence. He had made a makeshift rope out of his bed sheets and was going to use it to get over the fence. He was put into solitary for a little bit while we set up a different cell for him. I, to this day, can't figure out how he got the idea to take the window out. When he got released, he was only out for maybe a month or 2. He was arrested for a carjacking that resulted in a person's death. He was old enough for an adult facility by then.